Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel again, man. It's been a while since I checked out one of these videos. I had to do it, man. Shout out to all the 80s babies out there. 13 dangers kids totally ignored in the 1980s. Shout out to Recollection Road for the video. I'll leave in the description, man. I love these videos because of the nostalgia, you know. These videos be looking like an episode of Stranger Things, man. We gonna check this out. Ain't gonna waste no more time. Let's jump right into it.
Growing up in the 1980s meant you spent a lot of time away from the watchful eyes of your parents. It was the magic of boredom that generated so many great ideas, or so we thought. Kids just took more risks back then, which meant way more broken bones, but also more memories of an adventurous time. So let's take a look back at the dangers kids ignored in the 1980s.
Man.
It seemed like the ultimate thrill ride was jumping into the back of a pickup truck with your friends. The feeling of the wind whipping through your hair as you were jostled around the bed of the truck was freeing. It didn't matter if you were riding.
Is anybody watching Dexter? You guys watching Dexter out there? It kind of remind me of that, like the station wagons and all that stuff too, and how they're dressed. It's crazy, man.
Sitting on the tailgate or sitting on the wheel well. Having no seatbelts on and holding on for dear life was fun, especially if you lived around some country roads. Today, the thought of kids goofing off in the back of a moving truck would never fly.
Ever.
But in the 1980s, it was alive and well. There were many fears that arose during the 1980s, mostly from secondhand stories or urban legends.
What the hell?
This includes the fear of satanic cults. It is now called the Satanic Panic, and it gripped the nation, with stories of ritualistic sacrifices and kidnappings in many small towns. But it was the kids who were usually the ones spreading the rumors, buying into the hype, and venturing into the woods to find the places that these satanic cults would meet. Looking back, the hysteria was overblown, but the fear of it was very real for those growing up in the 1980s.
Yeah, I ain't messing with no woods.
80s kids were probably the most independent and self-reliant generation. With both parents away at work, there were many kids who came home to empty houses after school. Latchkey kids were usually responsible for getting to school on their own.
Really think about what he just said right there, man. Like think about today. I mean, even back then, stuff was happening. But like, I was born in July 1980. My whole thing is, you see this girl opening the door by herself. Like, I'm just thinking of like how you have stalkers, people follow you, all that stuff. Like, parents had to go to work. It wasn't like, I know back in the day you did have like those young babysitters and stuff, but still, like, I'm just thinking of like the thought of, well, no, because some kids, when I be going on my walks, as long as I've lived in this neighborhood, kids because I got a school right across the street from where I live, kids do be walking by themselves. But I'm just thinking of all the crazies out there.
Letting themselves in the house afterwards and keeping busy until their parents got home from work. With all this unsupervised time, kids sometimes found themselves making some bad choices, especially if they had friends around egging them on.
Smoking.
Rediscover your past by digitizing your family's memories with Legacy Box. Watch until the end of this video to find out more about preserving your legacy, and then visit legacybox.com/recollection. The 1980s introduced another real, unsettling fear, especially for those latchkey kids,
See that?
and that was being kidnapped. The stories on the news, coupled with images of children's faces on milk cartons, was a constant reminder of the dangers lurking outside. It probably didn't help that kids were watching more campy horror movies during this time, or that primetime television included the likes of Unsolved Mysteries and Rescue 911. So sitting down for breakfast and staring into the eyes of a child on the milk carton became a game of what if it happened to me.
So for all the parents out there, like when y'all used to see Unsolved Mysteries or these milk cartons and stuff, y'all wasn't concerned about the kids. Y'all was still letting them ride down the street on their tricycles and big wheels and walk home from school. Dang.
It's no secret that kids loved to be outside in the 1980s, and this was still before safety was built into every part of life because of lawsuits. It seemed everyone had at least one friend with a trampoline, and these trampolines didn't have safety nets, and sometimes they didn't even have pads covering the springs. Bouncing and then double bouncing with friends, learning backflips, and sometimes landing awkwardly was just part of the experience. Sprained ankles, bruises, and broken bones were the price you'd pay for defying gravity in the 1980s.
We built different, for sure.
Another thing kids were still doing in the 80s was climbing trees. This meant climbing as high as you possibly could, sometimes standing on thin, swaying branches that would crack from your weight. Seeing if you could go higher than your friend was a challenge. Not to mention you had a great view of the neighborhood. We also spent a lot of time climbing on the roof of the house, too. There were many reasons for this. Some used it to be daredevils, jumping onto a trampoline or into a pool, while others just climbed up to see if they could do it. Bravery was important back then, and facing your fears was a badge of honor.
Man.
For whatever reason, movies and TV shows convinced kids that quicksand was a major threat to our lives in the 1980s.
Hey.
According to them, it was everywhere. One wrong step and you'd be sucked under. So what did kids do? They prepared themselves by pretending the sandy playground, or a dirt lot, was quicksand. Practicing and then surviving the dangerous quicksand was part of growing up, and it kept many kids busy as they played outside all day. It may have been a myth, but it captured imaginations and added a bit more drama to the decade.
Along with flying, quicksand is
For some reason, the 1980s included a lot of things that dealt with height.
Quicksand is probably my second fear. Flying and then quicksand. Ugh.
Even at school during gym class, kids would be faced with climbing a knotted rope to see how high they could go. This was back when PE class required a lot more physicality, because if the rope didn't defeat you, then maybe a rough game of dodgeball might. The fear of falling off the rope onto a thin gym mat or getting blasted in the face by a rubber ball were legitimate concerns for many, but it also built strength and confidence. Did you ever harness the power of the sun to start a fire with a magnifying glass? This made kids feel like both a scientist and a pyromaniac. The concentrated beam of sunlight refracting through a magnifying glass would burn leaves or paper at first. Then you might have graduated to ants or other bugs. The danger here was starting a fire that might burn down your house, but luckily it never happened to you. Many kids in the 1980s still carried around a pocket knife, but the one everyone wanted was a Swiss Army knife.
Yeah.
Having an all-in-one tool that fit in your pocket meant you could cut rope, tighten a screw, or even perform the ultimate act of friendship, becoming blood brothers. By today's standards, there was a chance of cutting too deep, or even catching some blood-borne disease. But to kids in the 1980s, living dangerously was always better if you had a best friend by your side. How many of you fell and got scraped up in the street in front of your house? With no knee pads, helmets, or elbow guards, kids that rode bikes, strapped on a pair of roller skates, or jumped on a skateboard after seeing Back to the Future knew that falling was inevitable. Hitting a rock or catching a crack the wrong way would send you flying, and road rash was the result. Your knees, palms, and sometimes face took the brunt, but oftentimes you were just told to get up and walk it off.
Or go take a nap.
At Recollection Road, I believe preserving the past is incredibly important, and our friends at Legacy Box
Shout out to
today's
Legacy Box,
asking the
man.
law animals and digital for a Legacy Box. Buy today to take advantage of this recollection to save 55% while supplies last.
Playgrounds were built differently back
Look
then.
at that.
It seems that everything had the potential to maim you if you weren't careful.
The heat.
Seesaws were pretty innocent until the person on the other end decided to either launch you into the air or jump off completely, punishingly slamming you into the ground. Spring riders were another deceivingly dangerous apparatus. The cute animals would tip back and forth violently, and then when you fell off, they would spring back and forth, so you had to be careful not to get hit by the heavy metal body. The playground was where kids learned how to get the wind knocked out of them, and then shake it off and keep playing.
We are definitely.
The 1980s was also dealing with many epidemics that affected kids. Of course, we were all still getting chickenpox, and so being exposed to it early meant you didn't have to worry about it later. But then a mysterious illness called AIDS became the biggest headline, and it had everyone worried. The uncertainties of how it spread, and the fear associated with catching a disease with no cure was something everyone dealt with during the 1980s. Then there was the epidemic of drugs, which kids were warned about from a young age. Cartoons, after-school specials, and public service announcements never let us forget that drugs were a danger. But surviving all of these things was what being a kid in the 1980s was all about. Let me know in the comments if I missed anything, and make sure to check the description of this video for links to pick up a t-shirt and sign up for the newsletter.
Oh man, the nostalgia again. We are definitely built different, man. When you look at all this stuff, because like I said, I got a park across the street and it don't look nothing like that. You know what I mean? Like going down those slides on a hot day with that metal. Oh my goodness. Yeah, you definitely had to get up and brush it off. Definitely. You know, you could entertain yourself so much outside. Now every kid outside got an iPad in their hand. People don't play outside like they used to. You know, I know the world, the technology, everything is advanced now, but that's why if you're an 80s baby, like for sure you are built different. Like, you know, like you can see the difference. Yeah, man. Shout out to all y'all. And shout out to Recollection Road. Peace out. Hope y'all enjoyed the video. Go ahead, like, share, comment, and subscribe.